Don't cook dog food in front of the relatives. John mocks me with a loud laugh. I'm at a loss for words at such a harsh insult. That stuff looks so unappetizing, there's no better way to describe it than dog food. Just redo it, will you? I immediately retort, "Ha, but I'm still shopping." John seems puzzled, but I don't care. It's my way of getting back at him. I'm Elizabeth Green, about to turn 50 this year. My daughter has moved out, so now it's just me and my husband, John, at home. John works at a major advertising firm well known for its frequent commercials. He's very ambitious, influenced by his surroundings. A man's worth is measured by his salary. That's his mantra. He seems to be working late every night to boost his income, and I've been quietly Don't cook dog food in front of the relatives. John mocks me with a loud laugh. I'm at a loss for words at such a harsh insult. That stuff looks so unappetizing, there's no better way to describe it than dog food. Just redo it, will you? I immediately retort, "Ha, but I'm still shopping." John seems puzzled, but I don't care. It's my way of getting back at him. I'm Elizabeth Green, about to turn 50 this year. My daughter has moved out, so now it's just me and my husband, John, at home. John works at a major advertising firm well known for its frequent commercials. He's very ambitious, influenced by his surroundings. A man's worth is measured by his salary. That's his mantra. He seems to be working late every night to boost his income, and I've been quietly supporting his hard work. I met John through a friend's introduction. I work from home, so I don't have many opportunities to meet men. The last time I had a boyfriend was in college. A concerned friend introduced me to John through an acquaintance. My first impression of John was that he was refreshing and handsome. He always looked sharp in his suit, the stylish haircut. To someone like me, who doesn't dress up much, he seemed from a different world. But John, in his unpretentious way, said, "I'm busy with work and can't meet often, but I'll cherish you. Let's shake on it." "Yes," I replied instantly, falling for him with a handshake. We started going out more often together. Our dates, however, were always just quick meals or coffee because John was always sure on time. Often, his phone would ring during our dates, and we'd have to cut them short. "It's work, sorry, but I have to head to the office. We'll make it up later," John would say, getting up from his seat. I was sad, but understood it was his job, and I accepted that. Then came John's proposal. I said yes with a smile, naively believing happy days were ahead. I had no idea this was just the beginning of 25 years of hardship. Lately, John's been coming home late. Since the early days of our marriage, he's always worked overtime, coming home only late at night. He wouldn't even eat the meals I prepared, just coming home to sleep. We hardly ever talked. That's why, early in our marriage, I once suggested to John, "Can't you come home a bit earlier? Let's have dinner together sometimes." John snapped, "Since when can you tell me what to do? Think you're better than me now." His irritated expression shocked me. "I didn't mean that. I'm sorry." I apologized immediately. I was terribly shaken, having little experience with relationships. But John wouldn't forgive me. Acting all high and mighty on your little income. "Don't get cocky with your part-time job," he said, and locked himself in the room. John didn't speak to me for about a week. I deeply regretted it, so I stopped asking him to come home early. John, with his old-fashioned mindset, would often say, "A woman should be 3 steps behind and silent. You should respect and obey me." I had lost my parents to illness early on, so I didn't really know what a normal family was like. But I was deeply in love with John back then and didn't want to break up over something like this, so I had no choice but to obediently agree with whatever John said. John was a very kind man before we got married, always considerate of me. He never forced me to speak formally or looked down on me. I kept hoping he would return to the man he was before we got married. That hope was all I had to cling to every day. But after 25 years, John never went back to how he was before our marriage. I was crushed by despair, but somehow managed to get through each day. Then one day John came home tired. "I'm going to take a bath," he said, yawning. "Welcome home. The bath's ready." I hurried to greet him. It was 2 a.m. He must have come back by taxi. I was tidying up his shoes when I felt something odd. There was a faint scent of perfume from John's shoes, a scent I had never smelled before. John always wore cologne before going to work, but this was different. I wanted to confront him right away, but he was already in the bath, and if I did, he would probably just get angry. The perfume alone wasn't enough evidence, so reluctantly I decided not to ask him about it. Weeks passed, and the unfamiliar scent of perfume still lingered on John's shoes. By then, my feelings for John had cooled. A man who might be cheating. I wanted nothing to do with him. John probably looked down on me anyway. He likely thought I wouldn't bring up divorce, and then a quiet divorce might not even affect him much. I didn't take any overt actions. Then one day, John suddenly spoke to me. "Next Sunday, we're having a family dinner at my parents' house. You better help my mom out on the day." "Yes," I replied. At John's family home, it was a tradition to gather and have a meal together every Thanksgiving. I had always gone early in the morning to help my mother-in-law. She prided herself on cooking the meals, while I mainly helped with cleaning and tidying up. Since my father-in-law passed away last year, we had skipped the dinner. As I thought about this, John talked happily. "Emily's coming home after a long time, isn't she? Emily is our only daughter, currently away at college. John absolutely adores her, the only person he seems to truly care for." "Yes," I answered him curtly. Then came the family dinner with the relatives. I had been busy since morning preparing at my in-laws' house. I diligently cleaned the living room, the venue for the event. "My back went out the other day, Elizabeth. I feel bad you have to do so much," my mother-in-law said. She's fragile in appearance and very kind to me, a stark contrast to John. In the midst of all this, John arrived at his parents' house. "Are you helping Mom properly?" "She's got a bad back, so make sure you take care of the relatives," John said with a boisterous laugh. His mother scolded him, but he seemed unfazed. "Ah, it's all so noisy. I just wish Emily would hurry up and get here," he said, and went off to his old room, likely planning to relax until the event started. That's when my mother-in-law asked me to buy more alcohol. "Yes, I'll go now," I said, and hurried to the supermarket. While I was buying a large amount of alcohol, my phone rang. It was John. I sighed, feeling dismayed, but I couldn't ignore the call. "Hello," I answered reluctantly. It sounded like John was already in the living room with a lot of background noise. The relatives had probably started arriving at the in-laws' house. Then John said something unbelievable. "Don't make dog food in front of the relatives." He laughed mockingly. I was confused by John's words. He was loud, and I could hear a relative saying, "John, that's too rude to your wife. The food looked delicious, and throwing it into the yard. What a waste." I didn't know how to respond to such a terrible insult. John didn't care about my feelings or those of anyone else. "That stuff looked so unappetizing. It's nothing but dog food. Just remake it," John jeered with a loud laugh. I immediately replied, I'm still shopping, so there's no way I could serve dinner right now." "What?" John sounded confused. "I'm at the supermarket right now, and it's a 40-minute drive from here. There's no way I can cook right now." John didn't seem to accept my argument. "Then who made this meal? It's steaming, obviously fresh. Mom said she didn't make it, so it must be you." John sounded bewildered, but I didn't care. "Anyway, I'll be heading back now. We can talk about it later," I said, and ended the call. Whatever hell John was about to face didn't matter to me. He would probably regret it terribly, but that was just fine. This was my way of getting back at him. "I'm back now," I announced as I returned to my in-laws' house with the bags of alcohol from the supermarket. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry to trouble you," my mother-in-law said apologetically. She must have heard John's rude remarks earlier. She looked a bit uneasy. As I was helping my mother-in-law, John stormed into the entrance. As soon as he saw me, he started yelling, "Cut it out with your nonsense, claiming you didn't make that unappetizing meal. Your cooking is not fit for humans anyway." "John, that's so rude to say to Elizabeth." His mother scolded him, but it didn't seem to affect him. "You should really teach Elizabeth how to be a proper wife, Mom. That's why she can never make a decent meal," John said arrogantly, his face brimming with confidence. It was unbelievable how much he belittled others. I let out a heavy sigh at John's terrible character. "What's that?" John seemed irritated by my sigh, glaring at me intensely. "No need to show any mercy to someone who looks down on others like this. I plan to bring him down thoroughly." With a smile, I said, "The meal today wasn't actually made by me. Shall I call the person who did make it?" John looked puzzled. "You can come out now," I called to the person hiding. Emily, John's beloved daughter, stepped out, and his face went pale, his body trembling. "Dad, I'm sorry for making dog food," she said. "No, that's a misunderstanding. I thought Elizabeth made it. But why did you hide and cook?" John asked, flustered. "I asked Emily to do it," I told John. "Elizabeth, what have you done?" he exclaimed. "Mom, did you know about this?" His mother nodded, her face pale. "I asked my mother-in-law to keep it a secret. I wanted to surprise you," I explained. She knew how much John adored Emily, so when I said I wanted to surprise John with Emily's cooking, she happily agreed. "I can't wait to see John's surprised face," she had said excitedly. I felt bad for deceiving such an enthusiastic mother-in-law. She thought John and I were getting along well, which was why she was so shaken by what was happening. I explained everything to my bewildered mother-in-law. "Unfortunately, John and I aren't getting along at all. His life is just about coming home to sleep, and on top of that, he's been cheating." My mother-in-law's face turned pale upon hearing this. "Hey, don't say things like that," John yelled at me. "Do you want proof?" I handed John an envelope filled with documents. "What's this?" he muttered, beginning to read the documents. His face turned ashen as he read. "It seems you didn't notice, but lately there's been a strong scent of women's perfume, so I hired a private investigator." The amount of evidence that came up was shocking. I had always thought John's late returns were due to work. However, the investigator's findings revealed that it was due to his affairs. John had been making advances to women at work and business partners. Even the phone calls during our dates were with other women. I spoke to John in a calm voice. "It's amazing, isn't it? While I was balancing work and taking care of our home and child, you were out having fun with other women." Hit with the truth, John's face showed frustration, and he fell silent. Ignoring John, I continued speaking. "But recently, you need to gift brand-name bags to have an affair with girls, huh? They won't pay attention to you unless you spend money. How pitiful. Is that why you've been stingy with the household expenses lately?" John had been reluctant to contribute to household expenses recently. He said, "Now that Emily has moved out, we don't need that much for household expenses." No matter how much I argued, he wouldn't give any, so I had to cover them with my income. It turned out he was using the money for his affairs. The relatives gathered at the entrance were appalled. John having such a good wife and still cheating, that's despicable, they said with disgusted expressions. Firmly declared to John, "I'm divorcing you. Why don't you remarry one of your mistresses? Of course, I'll be taking a fair amount of alimony." John was visibly shaken by the mention of divorce. "Don't divorce me. I've spent most of my savings on my mistresses, so there's barely anything left. I can't afford a divorce." I was astounded by his selfish reasoning. The private investigator's report showed John spending on high-end restaurants and brand bags for his affairs. Even with a job at a major company, there's no way he could have savings left after spending like that. "You are the worst," a relative said, looking at him coldly. Emily glared at John in silence. John finally realized the atmosphere around him and looked uncomfortable. I began to speak to John dispassionately. "Do you really think such a selfish reason will hold up? And it seems you're relying on my income now, but you've always looked down on my work-from-home job, haven't you? A home-based job is just a side gig. I work at a major company and am much more significant in society," John stated proudly. Clearly, he had no remorse for his past actions and still looked down on my job. It was time to shatter his pride. "I'm a freelance engineer. While my income fluctuates, it's about the same as yours annually." What? What do you mean?" John was utterly bewildered. "After graduating from an online university, I landed a job at a major telecommunications company and later went independent. I've been able to secure projects due to my career experience. Without a decent income, I couldn't have maintained our lifestyle, especially since you haven't been contributing to the household expenses recently." John slumped down, crestfallen. "Elizabeth is earning as much as me." He was taken aback by the amount of my income, much more than he expected. He was clearly in shock. "In truth, I could have divorced you earlier, but I didn't want to make Emily live with a single parent. That might have complicated her marriage prospects," I continued. Emily was still single, and I didn't want her marriage prospects to be affected, so I had been hesitant to initiate a divorce. Suddenly, John looked at Emily and pleaded, clinging to her. "Emily, you don't want your mom and dad to divorce, do you? Please say something to Elizabeth." He was desperately trying to find words, but Emily looked at him coldly. Emily sighed deeply and said, "I'm disappointed in you, Dad. I want Mom to be happy and divorce you. It's okay if I marry someone who doesn't mind having a single parent. I don't care about you anymore." Emily turned her eyes away from John. When I explained everything to Emily, she was furious. "I don't need a dad who's always cheating and doesn't even provide for the family. So go ahead and do what you need to, Mom. I'll support you," she encouraged, leading to this moment. I always expected John to make some nasty comment about everything I did, so when I served dinner, his reaction was more extreme than I anticipated. This probably accelerated Emily distancing herself from her father. "Please don't give up on me," John pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Rejected by his beloved Emily, what a pitiable man, I muttered to myself. Both my mother-in-law and the relatives kept their distance from John. No one was there to console him, a natural consequence of his past actions. John remained crying in the same spot for a while afterward. My divorce from John was finalized, but it wasn't easy. John vehemently opposed the divorce at the law firm, insisting, "I will never agree to a divorce." Apparently, he didn't want a divorce because he had no money left, but the evidence of his affairs was overwhelming. When I declared, "If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll increase the alimony," his face turned pale, sweating profusely. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry. I'll agree to the divorce." After the divorce, John was dumped by his mistresses. He had no money left to give them what they wanted. I also claimed alimony from the mistresses. They were only interested in John for his money, and now that he was penniless, they had no interest in him. So John was left alone, living a very lonely life. Even Emily cut off contact with him, saying, "I can't think of someone who cheats as a father," and blocked his calls. His relatives did the same, distancing themselves after the affair was exposed. John tearfully apologized through his lawyer, saying, "I'm so sorry. I'm all alone now. Every day is so lonely. Please, let's start over. Then Emily and Mom will treat me as before." John must have been desperate to say such things. Being alone in his 50s must be hard, but it's all his own doing. I hope he reflects on his actions. I firmly requested my lawyer to convey my refusal to reconsider the relationship. Time passed and the end of the year arrived. I moved out of the house I shared with John, using the alimony as a down payment for a condo. The apartment is a 2-bedroom with a living room, dining area, and kitchen. ideal for someone living alone.
The evening air was tense, a prelude to the storm brewing in our living room. "What do you mean she's moving in tomorrow?" I asked Greg, my voice barely containing the shock and anger. Greg didn't even flinch. "It's decided, Elise. Mom's coming to live with us. It makes sense, especially now." "How can you make such a decision alone?" I countered, feeling the walls of our home closing in on me. "What about our plans, the rooms?" He had that all-knowing look, the one that always set me on edge. "We'll convert your home office. It's the only logical solution." "My office? Greg, that's my space, my sanctuary." "You don't really need it," he said dismissively. "Besides, I pay the rent here, $3,000 a month. That gives me a say in how we use the space." I was stunned. This house, the one my parents had passed down to me, now felt alien, controlled by Greg's financial hold over it. "But this is my family home," I whispered, more to myself than to him. Greg's voice was cold, devoid of the warmth I once fell in love with. "Your family home or not, I'm the one footing the bills now. Get your stuff cleared out by tomorrow." That night, I couldn't sleep. The realization that our marriage was a facade, built on the shaky grounds of financial power and silent submission, hit me hard. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my office being emptied. Marion, Greg's mother, arrived with her suitcases, an unwelcome guest in my own home. In the days that followed, the tension escalated. Marion's presence was overbearing. She rearranged the kitchen, criticized my cooking, and worst of all, she had this way of subtly belittling me in front of my daughter, Mia. I felt like a stranger, tiptoeing around my own life. Greg became more distant. His conversations were curt, his nights late. Our home, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now echoed with the sounds of unspoken resentments and forced politeness. One evening, I overheard Greg and Marion discussing finances. "Elise doesn't contribute much anyway," Marion scoffed. "She should be grateful we're letting her stay." I felt a surge of anger. This was my family home, a place of cherished memories, now being reduced to financial transactions and power plays. The next morning, I confronted Greg. "I want to talk about the rent," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "This was my family's home. I never agreed to pay rent." Greg's response was a mix of arrogance and indifference. "Well, things change, Elise. I'm paying the bills, so technically it's more my house than yours now." That was the moment I knew. Our marriage, a delicate balance of love and compromise, had crumbled under the weight of control and disrespect. I called my father, Nolan, my voice shaking. "Dad, I need your help. It's about Greg." As I hung up, I realized that this was just the beginning. I wasn't going to let Greg and Marion turn my life into their dominion. They might have underestimated me, thinking I'd crumble under their control. But they were wrong. I was my father's daughter, and I knew a thing or two about standing my ground. Sitting in the empty room that used to be my office, I couldn't help but reminisce about the early days with Greg. We were like two pieces of a puzzle, fitting perfectly with our differences. But now, those differences were tearing us apart. I remembered our first date, how Greg's laughter had echoed in the autumn air, how he had looked at me as if I was the only person in the world. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the man who had just usurped my family home. My phone buzzed, pulling me back from the past. It was a text from my father, Nolan. "I'll take care of it. Meet me at the shop tomorrow." Nolan's auto repair shop had been a staple of my childhood. It was more than a business. It was a testament to his hard work and dedication. That shop, much like our family home, held memories of a life once filled with warmth and togetherness. The next day, I walked into the familiar scent of oil and metal. Dad was under a car, his hands expertly moving as he worked. "Dad," I called out. He slid out, wiping his hands. "Elise, let's talk in the office." The office was a small room filled with trophies from car shows and framed photos of our family. It was a capsule of happier times. "I can't believe Greg is doing this," Dad said, his eyes reflecting a mix of anger and concern. I sighed. "I know, Dad. I think it's time for some payback." Dad nodded, a determined look crossing his face. "What do you have in mind?" "I want Greg and Marion out of the house, but I want to do it legally, make them feel the pinch of their actions." Dad leaned back in his chair, pondering. We can draw up a rental agreement, hike up the rent, make it impossible for them to stay. I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. This was the first step in reclaiming my life, but it also meant declaring war on Greg and Marion. Let's do it, I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. Over the next few days, Dad and I worked on the rental agreement. It was a meticulous and strategic plan, designed to legally corner Greg and Marion. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction imagining their faces when they'd see the new terms. Meanwhile, back at the house, Marion's true colors began to show more vividly. She complained about everything, from the way I dressed Mia to the brand of coffee I bought. Her words were like needles, subtle but piercing. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. Yes, I've finally got a lease under my thumb. This house will be ours soon. Fury and disbelief coursed through me. How could she be so callous, so manipulative? But her words also steeled my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about protecting Mia from this toxic environment. The day came to present the rental agreement to Greg and Marion. I walked into the living room, the document in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. Greg, we need to talk about the house, I said, my voice steady. He looked up, surprised. What about it? I handed him the document. It's the new rental agreement. You need to read it. As Greg's eyes scanned the pages, I saw a range of emotions flicker across his face. Confusion, disbelief, and finally anger. This is absurd. The rent's been raised tenfold. Yes, I said, meeting his gaze. It's the market rate for this property. If you can't afford it, you'll have to find somewhere else to live. Greg's face turned red, his anger palpable. You can't do this to us. I can, and I am, I replied, feeling a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. This is my family home, Greg. You've forgotten that, but I haven't. The days following the presentation of the rental agreement were a blend of silent battles and open confrontations. Marion's true nature, once hidden under a veil of polite intrusion, now emerged in full force. One evening, I was setting the table for dinner when Marion entered the kitchen. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, landing on the simple yet nutritious meal I had prepared. This is what you call dinner, she scoffed. Back in my day, we knew how to provide for our families properly. I clenched my teeth, forcing a polite smile. It's healthy, and Mia likes it. Marion snorted, dismissing my efforts with a wave of her hand. Children don't know what's good for them. It's up to us to teach them. Clearly, you lack that understanding. Her words stung, but I remained composed. I had learned that reacting to Marion only fueled her disdain. As the days went by, Marion's presence became more oppressive. She criticized my parenting, my housekeeping, even my choice of clothes. It was as if she was deliberately trying to provoke me. One afternoon, I returned home from a quick errand to find Mia in tears and Marion sitting calmly in the living room, reading a magazine. What happened? I asked, rushing to comfort my daughter. Your child is just being fussy, as usual, Marion replied without looking up. I don't have the patience for such nonsense. I held Mia close, feeling a surge of protective anger. How could she be so cold towards her own granddaughter? Later that week, I had a meeting with a potential client for my small business. Marion, could you please watch Mia for a couple of hours? I asked, hoping for a bit of cooperation. Marion looked at me, her expression one of annoyance. Fine, but make it quick. I have plans later. I returned from the meeting to find Mia once again in distress. Marion was nowhere in sight. After calming Mia down, I confronted Marion. Where were you? I trusted you to look after her. Marion rolled her eyes. I had to step out for a bit. She was sleeping, anyway. What's the big deal? The big deal was that Marion's selfishness was now affecting Mia, my most precious treasure. I realized then that Marion would never change. Her contempt for me had spilled over to Mia, and I wouldn't tolerate it any longer. I called my father that night, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and determination. Dad, it's getting worse. She's not just targeting me now. She's neglecting Mia. Nolan's response was swift and resolute. We need to speed up our plan. It's not safe for you and Mia there anymore. The following day I saw Greg and Marion whispering in the living room, their heads close together in conspiracy. What are you two plotting now? I asked, a hard edge to my voice. Greg looked up, his expression one of feigned innocence. Just discussing some financial matters. Nothing for you to worry about. But I knew better. The rental agreement had unsettled them, and now they were scrambling. I could almost smell their desperation, a scent that, under different circumstances, might have been satisfying. Instead, I felt a cold resolve settling in my heart. They had underestimated me, thinking I would crumble under their pressure. But they were wrong. I was ready to fight back, not just for myself, but for Mia. The battle lines were drawn, and I was no longer just a passive player in their game of control. I was about to change the rules entirely. Every day in the house felt like walking on a tightrope. Marian's presence loomed large, a constant source of negativity. Her comments were like thorns, pricking away at my patience and resolve. One evening, as I put Mia to bed, I overheard Marian speaking to Greg in hushed tones in the living room. "Elise is not fit to be a mother. She's too soft, too indecisive. You need someone who can actually run a household efficiently." I stood frozen, listening to their conversation. Greg's reply was a weak agreement, a betrayal that cut deeper than any of Marian's sharp words. The next day, I confronted Greg. "Do you really think I'm a bad mother?" I asked, my voice shaking. Greg avoided my gaze. "It's not just about being a mother, Elise. It's about being responsible, about being adequate." Adequate. The word echoed in my mind, a stinging indictment of my role in this family. As the days passed, Marian's manipulations grew bolder. She rearranged the furniture to her liking, disposed of items she deemed unnecessary, and took over the kitchen, effectively pushing me to the margins of my own home. One day I came home to find Mia crying inconsolably. Marian was in the kitchen, completely ignoring her. "Why aren't you attending to her?" I demanded, my heart racing with worry. Marian shrugged, a cold detachment in her eyes. "She needs to learn to soothe herself. It's part of growing up." That night I called my father, my voice a mix of anger and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. Greg and Marian are destroying everything I hold dear. I need to get out." Nolan's response was immediate and firm. "You and Mia come stay with me. We'll sort this out." I hesitated. Leaving the house meant giving up the fight, but staying meant subjecting Mia and myself to more torment. The decision crystallized the next morning when I found my personal belongings boxed up in the garage. Marian had decided they were cluttering the house. That act of violation was the final straw. I packed our essentials, taking one last look at the home that had once been a haven of love and happiness. As I closed the door behind me, a sense of relief washed over me. I was leaving behind the oppressive walls of that house, but I was also stepping into the unknown. Staying with my father brought a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. Mia's laughter returned, filling the house with joy. But the battle was far from over. I met with my lawyer to discuss the divorce. "I want full custody of Mia," I stated firmly, "and I want the house back." The lawyer nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We'll build a strong case. You have rights, Elise." As the legal proceedings began, I realized this was more than just a divorce. It was a fight for my identity, for my daughter's future, and for justice against the tyranny of Greg and Marian. Greg's reaction to the divorce papers was a mix of shock and anger. "You're making a mistake, Elise. You won't win this." But I was resolute. I had tolerated, endured, and sacrificed enough. It was time to reclaim my life and protect my daughter from the toxic environment Greg and Marian had created. I was no longer the passive, accommodating Elise. I was a mother, a fighter, and I was ready to take back control. The divorce proceedings were a cold, calculated dance of legal maneuvers and emotional confrontations. Greg's shock at my decision to leave quickly turned into a bitter determination to fight back. I sat in the lawyer's office, reviewing the documents. "He's contesting the custody of Mia," I said, my voice laced with disbelief. The lawyer nodded solemnly. "He's also challenging your claim to the house. But we have a strong case, Elise." As the legal battle ensued, my resolve hardened. This was no longer just about leaving a failed marriage. It was about standing up against the injustice and manipulation I had endured. In the midst of this, my father and I finalized our plan for the rental agreement. It was a strategic move designed to legally compel Greg and Marian to vacate my family home. One afternoon, I arrived at the house to deliver the new rental terms. Greg and Marian were waiting, their expressions a mix of defiance and curiosity. I handed Greg the document, watching his face as he read through it. His eyes widened in disbelief. This is ridiculous. You're increasing the rent to an exorbitant amount. Yes, Greg, I replied calmly. That's the market rate for a property of this size and location. Marion interjected, her voice shrill with panic. You can't do this to us, Elise. This is our home. No, Marion, I countered, standing my ground. This is my family home. You and Greg have made it clear that I'm not welcome here. So if you wish to stay, these are the new terms. Greg slammed the document on the table, his anger palpable. We'll fight this. You won't get away with it. But behind his words, I sensed his fear. The realization that they were losing control was dawning on them. As I left the house, a bittersweet feeling enveloped me. I had taken a significant step in reclaiming my home, but the sight of Mia's abandoned toys in the living room reminded me of the personal cost of this battle. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal appointments and emotional upheaval. I clung to Mia, her innocence and love, my anchors in the storm. During one of the hearings, Greg's true colors came to the forefront. Elise is unstable, Your Honor, he claimed. She's not fit to be a sole custodian. I listened, my heart pounding, as my lawyer countered his baseless accusations with evidence of my stable income and loving relationship with Mia. In a subsequent meeting, Greg's lawyer proposed a settlement. Greg is willing to relinquish his claim to the house in exchange for joint custody and a reduction in the rent. I hesitated, torn between the desire to end this battle and the need to protect Mia from Greg and Marion's toxic influence. But then I remembered Mia's tears, Marion's callousness, and Greg's betrayal. This was no longer just about winning a legal battle. It was about justice and setting an example for my daughter. I refuse, I said firmly. I will not compromise on Mia's well-being or my family home. The decision to continue the fight was a difficult one, but it was necessary. I was no longer the woman who tolerated disrespect and manipulation. I was fighting for my rights, for my daughter's future, and for the dignity that Greg and Marion had tried to strip away from me. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The day of the final confrontation arrived like a storm on the horizon. Armed with the legal documents, I stood at the doorstep of what used to be my sanctuary, now a battleground. Greg opened the door, his face a mask of defiance. Marion hovered behind him, her eyes betraying her anxiety. What do you want, Elise? Greg asked, his tone icy. I'm here to finalize the arrangements, I said, handing him the updated rental agreement. As he read, his expression shifted from confidence to disbelief. This is absurd. You're demanding a rent that's beyond unreasonable. It's the market rate for a property of this size in this location, I replied, my voice steady. If you can't afford it, you'll have to vacate. Marion stepped forward, her voice trembling. You can't do this to us. We have nowhere else to go. That was your choice when you decided to push me out of my own home, I said, meeting her gaze. Greg slammed the document on the table. We'll see what the court has to say about this. You're not going to get away with trying to evict us from our home. This ceased being your home when you chose to disregard my rights and my feelings, I retorted. The air was thick with tension, the once familiar living room feeling like a foreign land. I looked around, memories flooding back, of laughter, of love, of a life that once was. Now it was just a shell, housing bitterness and betrayal. As I turned to leave, Marion's voice stopped me. Elise, please. We can negotiate. There must be a way to resolve this. I paused, considering her words. Then, with a resolve that surprised even me, I said, There's nothing left to negotiate. You made your decision when you chose to side with Greg against me and Mia. With that, I walked out of the house, leaving behind the echoes of a life that no longer existed. The days that followed were a mix of relief and uncertainty. The legal proceedings were grueling, but my resolve never wavered. I was fighting for my dignity, for my daughter, for the justice that had been denied to me. Eventually, the court ruled in my favor. Greg and Marion were given a month to vacate the property. The news hit them like a tidal wave, washing away the last vestiges of their control and arrogance. I watched from a distance as they moved out, their belongings a testament to their shattered dreams and misplaced ambitions. In their eyes, I saw the realization of their defeat, the understanding that their manipulations had backfired. As I stepped back into my family home, now empty of their presence, a sense of peace enveloped me. It was not the peace of victory, but the peace of justice served. I walked through each room, reclaiming the space that had once been ours, mine and Mia's. The walls that had witnessed so much pain now stood as silent sentinels to a new beginning. I knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be wounds to heal, memories to reconcile. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. I had fought against the odds, stood up to the tyranny of Greg and Marion, and emerged stronger. This was more than just a legal victory. It was a reclaiming of my life, a testament to the strength I never knew I had. The dust had settled, the legal battles were over, and the once turbulent house was now calm. As I stood in the empty living room, the memories of what had transpired echoed in the silence. Mia played in the corner, her laughter a balm to my weary heart. Watching her, I realized that this struggle, though fraught with pain, was necessary. It wasn't just a fight for a house. It was a battle for our future, for our peace. The day Greg and Marion left, I saw a glimpse of realization in their eyes, a dawning understanding of the consequences of their actions. Marion looked back at the house, her expression one of loss and regret. Greg, defeated and subdued, didn't meet my gaze. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I returned to my small business, finding solace in the familiar routine and the support of my regular customers. Mia thrived in the newfound stability, her resilience a testament to the strength of our bond. One afternoon, as I was closing the shop, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Greg. He looked different. The arrogance had left his eyes, replaced by a certain humility. "Elise," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize for everything." I listened, a mix of surprise and skepticism. "Why now, Greg?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound. Losing the house, the divorce, it made me realize how wrong I was, how much I lost because of my pride and my mother's influence. I considered his words, the years of pain and struggle flashing through my mind. "Your apology doesn't change what happened, Greg. But I accept it, for Mia's sake." Greg nodded, a look of relief passing over his face. "Thank you, Elise, and I'm sorry, truly." As he walked away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. Greg's apology didn't erase the past, but it offered a closure, a finality to the turmoil we had endured. In the months that followed, I renovated the house, turning it into a home once again. The walls were repainted, the rooms refurnished, and new memories were made. It was a sanctuary for Mia and me, a place of healing and growth. I often sat on the porch watching Mia play in the yard, reflecting on our journey. The challenges had been immense, but they had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood up against injustice, fought for my rights, and reclaimed my life from those who sought to control it. It was a journey of self-discovery, of learning to trust in my own strength and resilience. In the end, this was more than just a story of revenge. It was a tale of empowerment, of rising above the trials and tribulations to forge a better future for myself and my daughter. The house, once a battleground of conflict and manipulation, was now a haven of peace and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most rewarding victories. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the yard, I held Mia close, grateful for the journey that had brought us here. We had overcome, we had triumphed, and we were finally home.